Um, First off, folks, the thing to remember is, Windows as a service is not a new concept. Ever since the day Microsoft released Windows 10, Windows as a service has been in existence. It's just that, no one paid any attention to Windows as a service because Microsoft and their entire partner ecosystem up until now have mostly been focused on getting customers to Windows 10, not so much as how they can keep them current on Windows 10. So just to give you a little bit of a background, right before the holidays, a bunch of us met with Microsoft in Round Rock, where Microsoft came to us with the following problem statement. They said, Dell, we have about 6 million or so customers on Windows 10 version 15.11, which is almost on the verge of going end of life, end of support. We are concerned that customers are not upgrading to the latest version of Windows 10, which is really one of the primary motivations for Windows as a service itself. They want to keep customers current on Windows 10. That's the model of the future, right? Keeping Windows current and secure on an ongoing basis. So to understand the future, it's important to pay attention to the past, which is really where I want to start with. When you think about how, we handled upgrades back in the day from XP to Windows 7 or Windows 7 to Windows 8, etc., it was always a big bang approach. Microsoft released a newer platform once every 3 to 5 years. Our customers, went through a big, massive application and every other possible testing at that point, browser testing, application testing, and everything else. And then they had to upgrade their entire user base to the new platform. Talk to your average customer and they'll tell you that their XP to Windows 7 migration was nothing to write home about. It was a pretty poor customer experience. So going forward, Microsoft wants to change the model in which, the operating system is kept current and up to date. And that's really where they introduced Windows 10 and the as a service model. So as you look at the bottom right-hand corner here, folks, you see two big spikes here as the new operating system was released, which is conveying essentially the amount of disruption that the customer had to endure. Right. However, with Windows 10, they expect a very nominal level of ongoing effort to keep the operating system current itself. And the purple line here indicates specifically how soon they're able to avail new features in the Windows 10 world. Now, that's a very big point to remember. Right. Back in the XP and Windows 7 days, customers had to await the release of a new operating system before they could get their hands at any new features. Now with Windows 10, Microsoft has changed that model completely, and they are now intent on continually releasing new features to customers in a more timely manner. Why is that important? Obviously, new features mean more goodness to us as customers, and also Microsoft is going to be introducing new security features into the operating system, which can be made use of by customers in a more timely manner. Right? So you don't need to wait for another 3 or 4 years before getting your hands at the new security features, etc. Right? So that's a fundamental difference between how things used to be done in the past versus what Microsoft envisions for Windows 10 through their Windows as a service model. Before I move on to explain what Windows 10 as a service is, any questions at this time?
Hey, Vijay, this is Kevin Fecto. Not just a question, but just that slide is super powerful. Matt and I just had a huge conversation with a huge customer last week, and just that disruption activity and the constant, kind of app dev cycle with the apps, that paints a super huge picture. And the most important part of that is the ongoing piece of it. So I absolutely will leverage this slide moving forward. Thanks for sharing this one. This is great.
Thanks, Kevin. And I got a few more slides also on our tailored application capabilities, right? I think applications offer us a tremendous amount of potential in the Windows as a service model. In fact, I'd say that is the single biggest potential right there. Once you get customers on Windows as a service, all that's left is really ongoing application support. In theory, per Microsoft's vision, the operating system should be really self-sufficient at that point. Once you implement Windows as a service for the customer, the operating system is going to take care of itself. How do you maintain and ensure that their applications portfolio is ready for the next rev of Windows 10, right? That's where I think Dell's capabilities comes into play. And I'll talk more about it in the slides to come.
I'm going to say one more thing is the fact that managing the deployment bands based on application compatibility will be one of the biggest impacts as well.
Yep. Thanks, Jorge. So folks, what is Windows 10, right? The way Microsoft defines Windows 10 as a service, right? You build your base image, and then you deploy that image, and then you unleash Windows as a service so that whenever the next release of Windows 10 comes about and Microsoft promotes one version of Windows 10 from current branch to current branch for business, that update, the version of Windows 10 which has just been promoted to current branch for business, and they have new terms, by the way, for the branch. They now call it a channel. As and when Microsoft promotes one particular version of Windows 10 from current branch to current branch for business, it gets automatically distributed to your customer's enterprise. And how is that possible? It is because you would have implemented Windows 10 as a service for them. Okay, Microsoft has promised that on an ongoing basis they would have 2 new feature updates for Windows 10 every year. And I'll define feature updates for you in a subsequent slide. For now, just know that there will be 2 new feature updates to Windows 10 every year. A feature update to Windows 10, consider that a major service pack or a minor upgrade to the operating system itself, which includes new features, not just security updates. Okay, so imagine this: if you're getting a new feature update once every 6 months, you don't want to have to go through a wipe and reload of your client base once every 6 months, right? That's where Windows as a service comes into play. You enable it, you unleash it, and after that, it takes care of itself. You will use your existing tool set, whether it's System Center, whether it's WSUS, what have you, and of course, Active Directory and group policies are how you configure Windows as a service. Right? But once you pull all these tools and technologies together and you implement Windows as a service for the customer, it is pretty much self-sustained at that point. Okay, so on an ongoing basis, what do your customers get once they have implemented Windows as a service? They get an automated mechanism to push out cumulative updates, which is basically your quality updates, which are your security updates and any bug fixes, etc., that Microsoft puts out every month. Okay, and also what else do they get? They get feature updates, which is how one version of Windows 10 gets promoted from current branch to current branch for business. Okay. All right. Before I go into the details, what other questions do you have on the slide?
Hey, Vijay, not that it applies to this slide, but can you update us around how long a channel or branch is going to be available for a customer to use? I know there was talk about Microsoft extending that from 18 months to 2 years. Do we have any update on kind of what the official stance of that is, or is it still, 18 months from a branch release, it's end of life and no longer under support?
Okay, Brad, hold that question until another 3 or 4 slides, and I'll address your question in a lot of detail. Okay. The short answer for now for enterprise and education customers, it's 24 months. For all other versions of Windows 10, it's 18. And I have a slide coming up which will show you exact dates when each version goes out of support.
Cool.
Any other questions? Okay. Okay, here are some definitions, folks, of terms that you have to know. When you speak with customers, when you speak with Microsoft, you will hear these terms used all the time. Okay. The first thing is, what is Windows as a service itself? Basically, it is the new model that Microsoft has implemented to keep the operating system current and secure. Okay. It's a continually updated model. Okay, which is intended to take less IT hands-on time from customers on an ongoing basis. Okay, they don't see it as a very hands-on intensive effort, which is the reason why, once you configure it, once you enable it, they only expect you to perform ongoing testing of applications. Everything else should just take care of itself. A feature update, like I mentioned a little while back, is a big update to the operating system itself, by which manner Microsoft is going to introduce new features into the operating system. You don't need to wait another 3 or 4 years to get the next set of grand features in the operating system. 6 months from now, you can expect to get a robust set of new features. Okay, so that's what they call a feature update. Right? And they're promised, twice a year cycle for these feature updates. And a lot of times, folks, a feature update is typically, designated in the YYMM format. Okay, so 1709 means September of 2017. Right? Add 6 months to that, so you can, on average, expect an 1803 and 1809, etc., etc. Okay. Quality updates, on the other hand, are the cumulative updates and the security fixes, the bug fixes that Microsoft releases at least once each month. Now, if you go back to the Windows 10 update history from Microsoft, you will see that in recent times they've released more than one update in certain months. For example, January, for some flavors of Windows 10, they had 2, sometimes 3 versions of 3 updates to Windows 10. Why? Because of all the, the meltdown and the Spectre bugs that were detected recently, the Intel chipset bugs. Microsoft had to put out some fixes. Right. Similarly, if you go back to the WannaCry time, you may find multiple cumulative updates within the same month. Generally speaking, Microsoft has promised to put out one such update every month. These are security fixes. And finally, deployment rings, folks. Basically, deployment rings are your way, or your customer's way, of controlling which of their users get what specific version of the operating system, whether they are on current branch or the current branch for business, and also how soon they get the next rev of Windows 10. It is how a customer's IT would control the rate at which Windows updates are distributed to their user base. It's a very important concept in Windows as a service itself, but it's tailored more so for implementation. It's an aspect of implementing Windows as a service itself, deployment rings. For now, all you have to know and remember is a deployment ring indicates which users get which flavor of Windows 10, which version of Windows 10, whether current branch or current branch for business, and the pace at which they get the updates as and when IT pushes them out. Any questions? Okay. All right. So how would your customers on average go about implementing Windows as a service? right? This is the tiered structure, folks, in which they would roll out Windows 10 within their enterprise. Okay? Your customer will almost certainly have some folks who are on the bleeding edge. A lot of times that would be IT. They are running the latest rev of Windows 10 as released by Microsoft. Those are the people who are running the insider preview version of Windows 10. It's even newer than the current branch, which is currently 1709, by the way. Right, so Windows Insider Preview is going to be something that's very new. Consider that as a robust beta version of the operating system. They make that available for two reasons. One, you get a taste for what's up and coming in the operating system. And two, for their own goodness, you do the testing on their behalf and you provide feedback to them as to what's working well and what's failing. Okay? And once you've gone past the Insider Preview, you will have a small subset of your user base on the semi-annual channel, which is what I've been referring to as current branch all this while. Semi-annual channel targeted is the current branch. Okay, that's where you would have a small fraction of your user base, no more than 10%. Okay, and within that 10% of the user base, you can create different rings. So ring 1 would be the folks who get that current branch earliest, and ring 2, maybe follows ring 1 a couple weeks or so, and then ring 3 can follow ring 2 maybe a couple weeks or a month or thereabouts. Okay, and then your ring 4 could potentially be the vast majority of your user base. That is the current branch for business. Current branch for business, folks, is typically at least one Windows 10 revision behind the current branch. So today, if Windows 10 version 1709 is current branch, 1703 or 1607 could serve as the current branch for business, which is the standard semi-annual channel. That is where Microsoft and Dell recommends that the bulk of the customer's user base be at. Now, why is that? This way, your folks on the current branch, which is like one version ahead, can do all the applications and the hot fixes and the cumulative updates. All that testing can happen with that 10% of the folks on current branch. So by the time the other 90% of your enterprise or your customer's enterprise catches up, all the issues would have been ironed out. You would have had a chance to remediate any application issues, et cetera, et cetera. And and then there's one other concept called the long-term servicing channel. Okay, I think most everyone on this call should be familiar with the LTSB, or the long-term servicing branch. Microsoft just renamed that to the long-term servicing channel. Essentially, folks, long-term servicing channel is the way things used to be done back in XP or in Vista or Windows 7 days. That channel is not going to be updated as frequently as the current branch or current branch for business. It's intended to be updated maybe once every 3 or 4 years. Okay? LTSC has a place in every organization. Each of your customers will have some specific mission critical systems, maybe shop floor systems, maybe, operating room systems, things which simply cannot be upgraded on a fairly frequent basis. For those systems, long-term servicing branch makes sense, but it should never be the norm for your average customer. Your average customer should subscribe to the Windows as a Service model. They will have little pockets of systems which qualify for long-term servicing branch. So folks, this is really the most important slide in this entire deck, in my opinion. Why does Windows as a Service matter to our customers? If your customers get this, they will proactively reach out to you and ask for our help with implementing Windows 10 as a service. And this is really what you have to try and help your customers understand. in the Windows as a Service model, every version of Windows 10 has a much shorter leash on life. Each version, Brad, to your question, is only good for no more than 24 months. And when we met with Microsoft, in November of last year, they said they intend to keep it at 18 months, but at least for the time being, for the enterprise and education customers, they are leaving the timeline for each version of Windows 10 at 24 months. Right? So once a particular rev of Windows 10 goes out of support, it's not going to get any feature updates and any quality updates, which means they're potentially looking at a wipe and reload scenario. Okay? A Windows 10 version that's out of support is vulnerable to security threats. Chances are their endpoint protection software or any other third-party application also is going to fall out of support as and when a particular Windows 10 version goes out of support. And one other important benefit of implementing Windows 10 as a service is, your customers get to test flighted builds of Windows 10 at the earliest possible. And, I put together this table here. So as you talk to your customers, you can also impress upon them that, hey, if you're running Windows 10 15.11 currently, it's going to go out of extended support on April 10th. So you don't have much runway before you implement Windows as a service or get your customers to a more current and supported version of Windows 10. And similarly, the other builds of Windows 10, 1607, 1703, 1709, etc. Right? So now that you understand what Windows as a service is, what are our capabilities, and how do we see, implementing Windows 10 as a service for our customers? Okay.
DJ, quick question back on the previous slide, if I could. Where we note that we've got an extra 6 months of support for enterprise and EDU, do we know what accounts Microsoft is delineating as an enterprise account, or is it anyone under an enterprise agreement or an enterprise license? What is that differentiation there?
Jerry, it's essentially the flavor of Windows 10 that your customer is deploying. If they are deploying Windows 10 Enterprise or Windows 10 for education, they get an extra 6 months. If they're deploying Pro or... Yeah. Good question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, folks, how do we go to market, right? Now that we know what Windows as a service is, how are we approaching our customers? This all started with our meeting with Microsoft a couple months back, right? At that time, it seemed very plausible, and we still have talks ongoing with Microsoft as to how they can fund a Windows as a service program, right? They basically came to us saying, Dell, we have a whole bunch of money. This year, our primary focus is Windows as a service. Up until last year, we were intent on deploying Windows 10. Now, this year, our focus is on Windows as a service. So we have a bunch of money, a bucket of dollars set aside. If you can come to us, and give us your plan on how we should fund it, then we're all ears. That's where this topic began. And so delivery, we got together and we hashed out how we want to go about implementing Windows as a service for our customers. And what you see on the slide is the summary of it all. Okay. Essentially, Windows as a service starts off with a readiness and design phase. We see that as a 3-week effort. Okay. So on average, it's going to run into a $30K price to the customer. Okay, I just put out an end-to-end program for a customer in the South Central region a couple weeks back, and this is exactly the model that I adopted. And it seemed to work out very well. In fact, the customer came back to us saying we had the most thorough Windows as a service implementation or bid amongst the three competitors that were vying for the business. Okay, so we have independent confirmation that this model actually works for customers. Okay, and then we also agreed internally that we would need probably close to 4 weeks to do the actual WaaS pilot itself, which is orange, the third pillar you see here. Okay, so in the 100K, we had consumed 70K, and we had another 30K left to do the bulk of the application readiness effort. So in a 100K model, folks, we have allocated 30K for application readiness. But to be honest, that's going to depend on how many applications your customer has. Our guidance for application readiness is your customer should test at least their tier 1 applications every time a new version of Windows 10 is released. As and when your customer goes from a particular version of Current Branch to Current Branch for Business, they have to, at a minimum, test their tier 1 applications. Tier 1 means any application that's business critical for them. However they define that, right? It may be an application that's used by just one user, but it may account for $200 million of their revenue. Now, I would call that a tier 1 app. On the other hand, it may not be so much for a direct correlation with revenue, but most of their user base may be using that application. I would call that also a tier 1. Right? So the readiness and design phase, the first phase of our approach, will help our customer qualify which their tier 1 applications are. Okay? And then once we are done with the WaaS pilot, we would have gotten our customers on the Windows as a service model. After that, it's ongoing maintenance, which is what we call managed Windows as a service model. Okay. Before I move on to define what each of these offers are, what the scope and deliverables are, folks, what questions do you have here?
Just one clarification, BJ.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jorge.
Thank you. I just don't want to tie these to necessarily Microsoft funding. We can sell these easily to large organizations. Yes, commercial, smaller customers is difficult, but we can definitely be sold to large organizations. Doesn't need to be tied. Use the funding for support of this value add that we offer, not necessarily tie it to it.
Jorge, that's an awesome call out, and I should have called it out myself. My apologies, I did not. Folks, this is so critical to customers that they will invite us to implement Windows as a service for them. We do not need to lead with any kind of funding to do Windows as a service for customers. There's a tremendous amount of value in here, and customers don't even realize, how important this model is for them on an ongoing basis. So great call out, Jorge. Even if we don't have any kind of Microsoft funding, it should be a very easy sell for customers. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Vijay, and you may go into this. I would love to see more detail around each one of these buckets and almost like the legacy consult now type one-pager that would go into what does it look like from a timeline, what are the deliverables, what is the rough scope. But then also, I think it'd be good to put some pigeonholes around, what are we talking to as far as size of the customer. So, for example, application readiness, we're talking about, one-time readiness, capability performed, compatibility testing, packaging of tier 1 applications to prepare for WaaS. We have customers that have, 10 tier 1 applications. We have customers that have 1,000 tier 1 applications, depending on, size of the customer. So I think it'd be good to add some earmarks as far as, what exactly are we putting into scope, and when would we need to expand this beyond kind of our 4 week process.
Brad, you are a mind reader today. This slide and the next slide should hopefully answer everything for you, okay? And if I still don't answer your questions, hit me up. Folks,
hey, Vijay, so question.
Yeah.
So just to expand on Brad's ask, I think for a lot of enterprise customers, I understand the process of going through these particular phases. But if a customer is really not looking to deploy or POC pilot any of the technologies, but more focused on the overall readiness and assessment of their environment. That would essentially move them towards a more of a as a service model. So there's a lot of dependencies within the overall environment from a tool consideration, from existing processes, from a high level approach based off the engagements that we delivered, the conversations we had. Do we have anything like overall summary in terms of our approach, how we would tackle this from a assess and readiness capability? You know, customers are looking, for example, the whole automation aspect or the MDM component. Should we go native Windows or non-native Windows tools? What are your recommendations, or do we have any sample sets of criteria or guidance that we're able to share, either a one-pager or overall approach that we would essentially bring to the table as a discussion point with customer?
You said MDM, Howson, right? First off, Windows as a service and MDM are, complementary. I wouldn't call them one and the same, right? They're related, but they're not the same, okay? And you also asked about customers are not so much interested in the technology or the implementation as in the process itself. Sure, a lot of the figuring out the processes, etc., is factored into our readiness and design phase. Okay, let me go through that, Howson, and if it still leaves any questions outstanding, I will answer. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. So folks, from a readiness and design perspective for WaaS, we've really broken it down into three parts, right? The first part of our readiness and design phase, we want to talk to our customer and understand their CMO. What are they doing currently from a Windows as a service readiness perspective? And we have really borrowed a lot of how we go about the CDA today. We evaluate the customer CMO based on 7 different categories, right? Whether it's imaging, whether it's deployment, whether it's end user support, whether it's systems management, device security, etc. Like, we evaluate the customer CMO based on 7 different buckets. To that end, it's a lot of smart guy consulting. Our resource would go on site, and we have a lot of templates, a lot of questionnaires, etc., that we can share with the customer, and they can either choose to provide their responses ahead of time, or we can discuss their responses on the ground during the first week. Either which option works. Okay, so the goal of that effort during the first week, folks, is to really create a WaaS readiness matrix for the customer. Now, why is that important? Because we understand from that exercise what the customer's gaps are from a WaaS initiation perspective. And once we know the gaps, we can also identify what else needs to be done with that customer before we actually start talking WaaS design and WaaS implementation. So that's the very first step. Okay, and that's also where you would cover a lot of the processes, etc., by which they do things today. Okay, and user support, for example. If something breaks or if a system goes into recovery mode, how would the customer help them get back up and running today? Right? If they don't have a good answer for that, then we need to figure out a process for them. Right? On the other hand, if they have challenges with implementing new features, new technologies in-house currently, we can work with them on that too. Right? So we have a different set of buckets. So that's the goal of the first week itself. The second week is where we get into more of an applications focus. We implement Microsoft upgrade readiness for the customer, and based on that, we get a good handle on their applications, and that's where we sit with their application owners and classify their apps into tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what have you. And that's also where we identify which of their applications needs to be tested for WaaS readiness, and which they're okay with not performing stringent, formal, structured testing. Okay, so at the end of the second week of design, we would have a list of applications, folks, that we have categorized into different tiers. Okay. The third week is really where we do user segmentation and start to gather information from the customer to determine which of their users need to fall into which bucket or which channel from a WaaS perspective. Right? That's where we understand what are your different lines of business. Within each of the different LOBs, which users can fall in the current branch. And, the bulk of the users would be in the current branch for business. Are there any users that may fall into the long-term servicing branch or the servicing channel? We also identify what their servicing tool is going to be, whether it's SCCM, whether it's WSUS, etc. And at the end of the third week, folks, we would know how Windows as a service needs to be implemented for this customer. Mind you, by this time, we have not configured, we have not done anything technical for the customer. We have just captured the requirements that we will then use to configure the different deployment rings and branches that we can then enroll their users into. Now, as you run into customers which are more process oriented, a lot of times financial customers fall into this bucket. They may have a little bit of a slow moving technology adoption culture internally, right? So they may come to us more from a process perspective. How do we roll something like this out? So those customers may ask us to focus more on the communication side and the logistics side, etc. Right? We can work with that too. In those cases, we just have to qualify it up front in our statement of work as to what it is that the customer is looking for. Right? One of my guys, Shane Fulbright, is doing just that for this customer out of Canada, Manulife. He is figuring out a lot of the processes, etc., for the customer, and they want us to spend 12 weeks figuring that out for them. I don't see that as being the norm. I see that as more of an exception. But it'll definitely come about. The thing to remember is whether we are doing a design for a WaaS implementation or whether we are doing a readiness and an assessment exercise in preparation for WaaS, we can help, and we have all kinds of collateral that we may need to go solution that today. I have standard SOWs already that you can use as templates. I just shared that with House and a couple of those templates last week. And while we are trying to formalize that across, our entire customer base, folks, it is going to be a little challenging to come up with one standard template simply because customers may have different needs from a WaaS readiness perspective. But generally speaking, the readiness and design phase, followed by application readiness, followed by the WaaS pilot, is the formula that we are sticking to. Okay? And before I move on to explaining application readiness and the WaaS pilot, what other questions do you have on the readiness and design?
Hey, BJ, this is Matt. I love the structure. I think it makes a lot of sense. I was going to just ask, it seems like customers that have the biggest need for this kind of service may be the most challenged to get you their application owners, get you the tier one applications just generally, understand how their environment is segmented for rollout ring definition, right? So sounds like that customer you have Shane on, that was one of those situations, and we just expand the scope, right? We just make that a longer duration.
Yeah, Matt, very good call out, right? You remember back when we were trying to talk to customers about application rationalization, right? And they said, damn if I know who my application owners are, right? It's been a challenge for us from day one, but there is no other way around it, right? Microsoft's tools like Upgrade, Readiness, etc., tries to soften that blow, but at the end of the day, we need participation from the customer. Right? Otherwise, we will come up short.
Hey,
And customers have got to realize that, this is a joint effort. This is not a Dell coming in, waltzing in and saying, hey, you guys step aside. We got it all figured out. No, it's a joint effort between Dell and the customer.
PJ, one more call out. This particular readiness and a design component is very critical to moving forward, because what they have done is every 7 years, they have done this, 5 to 7 years, they have done this to customers, and they've discarded that work. Part of our process is to make sure that they operationalize this process, because they will continue to use Windows Upgrade Readiness, Upgrade Analytics, Microsoft Analytics Upgrade, the same applications. They will continue to do the ring management and all those things. So this needs to be operationalized, and that is what the difference between Windows 7, XP, and any other operating system versus this one is. They have to have a repeatable process to make sure that they encounter moving forward. So I just wanted to call out and let you know that you have about 4 more minutes left on the call.
Thanks, Jorge. And another great call out from you, and that's part of what Microsoft Upgrade Readiness offers customers, right? Not just getting there, but staying there. So you can continue to use Upgrade Readiness on an ongoing basis as well, not just to get to Windows 10, right? Folks, like Jorge said, we have 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. Application readiness, all about what we do from an application readiness perspective, basically getting applications tested and ready for the new platform. If you want, I can talk more about it, offline or maybe on a future call, but most everyone should know our application compatibility testing and packaging capabilities out of the factory. None of that is new. Okay, and the WaaS pilot itself, that's where we get into the technical details. We configure the policies, etc., and we actually go live with a bunch of real pilot users. Okay, at the end of the day, it's very similar to any other Windows 10 deployment, except the goal of the WaaS pilot is specifically to unleash the Windows as a service effort itself. Okay. Once you have that implemented, folks, the managed WaaS phase is where I see a lot of our ongoing recurring revenue stream, and especially in the application space. So what can we do for customers in a managed WaaS perspective? Right? This is a steady state capabilities that we can offer to our customers. We do a lot of application management. Okay, we can do image management for them, which is really no different from keeping their images current. Maybe once every 3 months or once every 3 months, we can update their image and we can, give them an updated image, etc. Patch management, if our customers want any kind of support on site, basically bodies that can test, their applications or anything that they want us to test as and when, feature updates and quality updates are released by customers. Finally, if your customer is interested, we can actually implement a full-blown software asset management solution also for them, including license compliance. A lot of times software asset management and license compliance is a very easy sell. It pays for itself, very quickly because, if your customer has gone through any kind of license audit or any kind of audit from Microsoft or Adobe or something, they will totally realize the value of the solution. It's a science of its own. It is truly not directly coupled with Windows as a service. It is something your customers can implement even today with Windows 7 if they choose, right? But software asset management and license compliance is something we can implement for customers as part of our managed WaaS capabilities. Right? I think it's fairly straightforward. Any other questions? Okay. And this is the Windows 10 as a service readiness matrix. For those of you familiar with the CDAs, which is pretty much all of you here, it should look very similar. We have tried to define a similar matrix for WaaS, and this is what my team will really cover during the first week of the readiness and design 3-week phase. Okay, and this is the most important slide in this deck from an applications perspective. right? So we have tried to come up with a good, better, best model for ongoing application testing for Windows as a service, okay? I took an example of 400 applications. If your customer has 400 applications that they want to test, right? Every time a Windows 10 feature update is released, which is a new version of Windows 10, the good flavor as we define it is a point-in-time testing. You know, they get a one-time testing of their applications portfolio, whatever applications they want us to test for them, the tier 1 apps, right? If they are testing say 400 applications, we are looking at a price tag of $65,000. Okay. What do they get for the $65,000? They get the compatibility testing with that specific version of Windows 10. They also get virtualization testing. And a new capability that we've added just now is the vulnerability scanning of the application. Okay. Basically, determining if the application itself has any vulnerabilities. It's an extension of the Flexera, tool set. It's a capability that the tool set offers, and so we have added that capability to our testing as well. Now, the better model is twice a year testing, right? Why twice a year? Because Microsoft releases 2 feature updates every year. To align with each of those feature updates, we can test applications for our customers. If the customer is testing 400 apps, then you're looking at a price tag of $85,000. The best aligns with a per month testing of the applications. Now, if your customer wants to test their applications once each month, as and when a cumulative updates, a security update is released for the Windows 10 platform, we can do that also for them, and that clocks in at about $113,000 for 400 apps.
And this is done through the application factory, right?
This is all done through the factory, Jorge. None of this is on the ground. Again, depending on how your customer wants, we can do this with people on the ground. We can augment our factory capabilities with bodies on the ground, but generally speaking, we want to lead with our factory capabilities. That's where they get true economies of scale.
Hey, Vijay, this is Kevin real quick. So, we always had the mobilization as a factor in that factory. Is that included in here, or is it required to have that, or how does that work?
Kevin, I spoke to Phil about that. He's like, mobilization is overrated or something like that, right? So you can assume that at these prices, mobilization is included.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, folks? I know I went through a lot of material here. If you want me to come back and address any specific thing, I can. Or you can hit me up offline too. But thank you for bearing with me as we went over a couple minutes. Any last questions?
Great content, Vijay. Thank you.